one thing here. Okay. So let's just let our consciousness unfold into this exact moment. Give this moment a chance to be exactly what it is. You don't have to connect it to any other moments. You don't have to connect it to a past or a future. To do so is really just to project all over it. It's your way of showing it how powerful you are. Whereas if you can just show up for it, really just be here without having to connect it to anything, it can show you its power. And eventually what you'll come to discover that the it we're talking about is actually the real part of you. And the connecting of moments, stringing them together, is actually how you maintain the illusion that you are not that. So let's just sit patiently and cleanly in this moment. Listen, look, feel. Listen. Look. Feel in this moment the slight discomfort isn't coming from the moment. It's coming from the stories that don't want to let go. Or more accurately, that don't want you to let go of them. But as you find in every class, a moment comes where you're able to let go. And then there's comfort. A special kind of comfort. Very different from the comfort of distraction. This is a comfort that's actually sustainable. You're giving up a false stability for a stability that is self-existent. A conjured, stuck stability for a stability that is dynamic and breathing. But that doesn't come with a story attached to it. But it's only the struggle that's uncomfortable. The self-existent stability is very comfortable. You find it when you come to these classes because we hold the space for that. In a class like this, it's the pathway of least resistance. on your own, sometimes it's harder. And it's harder because you haven't had a fundamental realization about the way your life is composed. If you had, you wouldn't look to personal stories for a false stability. You would use stories to interact with the world and to entertain yourself here or there. But you would look for your peace in that point beyond the stories. That point between the stories. That stable, resonant intelligence that is always ringing all around you. When you have that fundamental realization, your relationship to the story changes. You engage with it in a completely different way. I wonder if I could show you. Take a moment and imagine that you have never accurately perceived anything. That everything you ever think you've perceived has been wrong. That you haven't actually seen what you think you're seeing or what you say you're seeing. Not just spiritually, but in every facet of your life. How is this possible? Because your equipment for sensing life is incredibly limited. You have 5 senses that are more geared towards survival than accuracy. Does my way of perceiving this help me survive? If yes, then you live long enough to breed and pass it on to your offspring. And you assume that what you're seeing is real. But if you could see the process of perception, you would walk away with a different idea of it. Everything that you're seeing as outside of you is literally a series of nerve impulses, algorithms of action potentials, striking the nervous system, and then you have centers in the brain that are interpreting it, transmitting it as visual signals, auditory signals. The imagery that looks like it's outside of you is all a mind projection of your interpretation. No different than if you had a machine processing data. So we're not seeing the true form of anything. As humans, we have certain similarities because we're sharing similar sensory mechanisms. There are cause and effect, evolutionary advantages to seeing things the way that we see them. But you can't really say that any of that is what's actually out there in front of you. And of the sensory details that we pick up, everyone in this room will pick up different things from this talk. We'll remember different pieces. We'll draw different inferences and conclusions. If the 3 of you were asked to describe my Zoom background from memory, you'd probably remember a bunch of different things. All of it would process through your limbic system, so it would hit your emotional body in different ways. You'd assign all kinds of different meaning to it. All supposedly looking at the same thing. So we have limited senses. And we just don't think about that. But think about it. What if nothing you've ever seen has been accurate? And you can't hang your hat on any of it. Then there's the context that you're missing. In almost every interaction you have with another human being. You know, maybe somebody wrongs you, and you know that they wronged you, and you're super certain that they wronged you and that something really unfair happened, and that makes them a very specific kind of preset person that you already have fabricated in your head because you've seen them before in different people. A whole complex person gets categorized. But some of what you saw was part of how you were processing it, not what you were picking up from them. Other parts you were picking up from them, but the meaning you assigned to it was out of context of the reasons that they were doing what they were doing. We look at their behavior and we assume that they're just us doing something different. And we don't realize there's an entire lifetime of 1 billion data points that we can't see. That could completely explain it in a way that takes all the anger away. You know, the truth is, if people can do better, they do better. Doesn't mean you have to have abusive people in your life. But you also don't have to hang on to it and drag it through your day. Again, what if you've never actually seen anything accurately? What if none of us have? Spiritual teachers are people who have bumped up against something that is constant and independent from the stories of our life. And it provides an influx of clarity. But we're still picking it up with our 5 senses. We're using intuition to understand it. We call it truth. But even that perception grows and changes over years. There's no one point where you finally are like, yep, I've got it all. Any teacher I've ever had who talked like that, follow him around. You'll see it's not true. But so when we begin our spiritual journey, there's all this looking for truth. There's looking for what's correct versus what's wrong. There's looking for the real vision, the real understanding, the real thing. And a lot of times you end up switching teachers or switching religions or switching jobs, just trying to find that true perception. But there are a series of realizations that come along the way that dismantle that process. You know, at first you come to realize how inaccurate your perception is so much of the time. And you start to think, well, what can I even really trust? Or you'll put all your faith in one person and realize that wasn't it. So then what is? You know, meanwhile, you're still practicing spiritually, so there's power developing within you. And you start to realize that not only is your ability to perceive flawed, but what's in front of you is actually impacted by your mind, your own projections. You know, they've started to prove that with quantum physics. And what does that say about the world in front of you? When even objective parts of the story are impacted by the expectation of the observer. What is this real world that you're perceiving? You reach for what's right, you reach for what's right, you put down what's wrong, you assess everyone around you through right and wrong, according to a bunch of principles that you took on, or some of which that you think you've discovered. But a time comes, a moment comes when you realize the most important thing you could say about any of it, the most freeing thing you could possibly say about any of it, which is, I don't know. You come to realize that you don't know. You don't know the full circumstances around why that person did what they did to you. You don't know all the laws of life. You don't know all the characteristics of life. It kind of seems like life doesn't have any characteristics. When you really explore, you can take on all sorts of philosophies, but then you also know that you're projecting those philosophies onto the screen of life, and life is taking shape around them. And because you're a true spiritual aspirant, you have shifted those philosophies so many times that you have watched life take on just about every shape you could think of. And so you come to realize that you don't know. I would argue that's probably one of the most important steps in enlightenment. Let's say awakening. I feel like the word enlightenment is used to manipulate people too much. I don't know as a fundamental awakening that when you really see it, it changes. It changes you on a very, very deep level. It changes the fundamental question that your spirit is asking as it moves through this experience. The question goes from, is this true or is this correct? To, is this useful? It's no longer about getting it right. It's no longer about clinging to something that you believe is right. Because you know it's all relative. You know it's all muddied up. And you know that your perceptive equipment is limited. And so this pursuit of this thing that can't be had is slowly dropped. And in its place, ironically, comes the one thing that can actually accomplish the things you were trying to accomplish, which is this deep question of, is this useful? Knowing that none of this is real, is this way of viewing this useful? It frees you up to be able to take on different models of life. It makes you flexible in a way you maybe never have been before. You come to realize why there are so many different religions and so many different teachings and people who are convinced they found the way. And it's just because there are many useful arrangements. You know, before that, let's say somebody wrongs you. And so your model of life is, this person did something wrong. They did something selfish and at my expense. And they will always have done it. It can't really be undone. And I can take space and push them away, but they're still in the world. And if I just let go of them or forgive them, it's almost like I've condoned it. And what they did is not right. So I can't condone it. And to live in that way, you actually keep your attention on the very thing you don't want in life. Whatever you place your attention on expands. Whatever you place your attention on, you're slowly becoming yourself. You know, I had a spiritual teacher with some stuck spots. And She used to actually talk about how people in the extermination business start to kind of look a little bit like the animals that they're exterminating. They start to kind of carry those vibes. And, I mean, I had noticed that a few times. And it's because they've got their attention on those animals so much. They've come to know them so well, and there's just so much attention and action around it. But like the one I'm thinking of, grew up in a time period where men did not treat women the way they deserved and didn't give them the rights and freedom that they deserved. And this teacher had this thing against men. She was a powerful woman, and, but she had this kind of stuck stuff around men. And I would hear her just say really insensitive things to a bunch of men who themselves had chosen a female teacher as their primary mentor. I don't think these men were the problem. And I always remember that, it's funny, she's so obsessed with the problems with masculinity, and through that has become, by her own definition, the most masculine force in my life. You become whatever you hang on to. At some point, though, when you look up and you just admit to yourself, you know what? I don't actually know what that looks like inside that person's head. I don't really know what that looks like inside her head. Whether it was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, it might be very understandable if I could really capture the magnitude of all the different forces spilling in. And maybe she even saw some things that I did that I wasn't even aware of, that she assigned a whole bunch of meaning to, that I couldn't have even pictured because I just don't carry her experiences. You look up and you just say, you know what? I don't know. And you move from, is this true? Is this right? To, is this current model useful? And the answer is no. No. Spending years of your life being angry with somebody for something that you actually want out of your life is not useful, because all that does is hold it in your life. And there are many different models. You could, one of my students once, I gave them an assignment. They were somebody who had a lot of kind of disempowering experiences in their life and really suffered with it, was very beaten down by it. And I had them go through all the women in their life. Women who they don't know how that story ended for that woman. They don't even necessarily know much about how the story began. It might have just been a teacher that they had for a year. But I had them actually building out the stories for those people in empowering ways. Create a different story. At first they felt uncomfortable because it wasn't true. And then I explained to them, well, right now you've got a view of them that is very dire and very disempowering to both them and you. And that also isn't true. So these stories are as true as anything else. I'm not sure true is one of your options. So if you're going to carry a myth, write the myth and write it in a more empowering way. And so she spent some weeks just going through and just deeply building inspired stories for all the people in her life. And there's something that frees you up when you do that, because those people, all of those stories are composites of you. They're all things that make up you. You were never seeing the other person. You were layering a story over a being that had their own story that you mostly couldn't see. So that would be one model. Is that useful? I think it's useful. Another model would be the idea that things happen at different levels of vibration. And so if someone is bringing something into your life that is negative and you don't want to be a part of it, rather than continuing to vibrate with them at that level, you recognize that the reason you're hurting over this is because you're matching their energy. And so you shift to a different energy and you maintain that space. Now, you can only do that if you know that you don't know. If you don't know that you don't know, then you're going to believe in doing that you're condoning their efforts, that you're leaving evil to go unchecked in the universe. But if you can just let go of it and be where you want to be through sustained attention, then you vibrate at a level where you can't really experience that anymore. And because you're not giving your attention to it, you're not becoming more like it, and you're not putting it out into the universe around you to come rebounding back upon you. Is it true? It's as true as anything else. Is it useful? Yes.
Are you saying that really there's no behavior that you can call out as coming from a not positive place because you never know the story?
I'm not saying that it's positive. There are plenty of behaviors that I would not choose to be around. What I'm saying, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't be honest with people. I certainly tell people when they're misbehaving in my presence. What I'm saying is, at a certain point, you do need to be able to step beyond it. And the fundamental realization that makes that possible is a realization that your sensory perception is not this perfect thing that we think it is. We have so much belief in what we see with our own two eyes. And if we really come to understand how flawed it is, then the parts of us that feel like we have to cling to one view of life get loosened up. And you suddenly have more flexibility and different ways to move. Don't get me wrong. We set cycles in motion that keep people in our lives even when they're being difficult and things like that. And we have to find our way through that. We work with people and we have to find our way through that. But, one of the things I've talked about in the past for that is, standing in front of somebody that is against you and has done all these horrible things, and choosing not to be a container for their negative karma. Literally forgetting everything you know about them right in front of them. It allows them to become something different in the moment if that's what they want to be. But more importantly, it allows you the ability to not live in their muck. But no, there are definitely good and bad experiences in life. But good and bad itself is also kind of a weird thing, right? Because good for who? Bad for who? Sometimes it's just a bad experience being around someone inconsiderate that's doing a bunch of things that they find good for themselves, but just without any consideration for you. I'm not saying I choose to ever be around people who continue to be awful, right? You take space, you do what you have to do. But when you take space, here's what it really is, Chell. When you've taken that space, are you really away from them? That's the difference. When you actually have them out of your space, are you actually able to step into your own energy? Or is there one hand always kind of hanging on to what they're doing and what they did?
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. That makes sense.
Yeah. Because then there's that back and forth that just never stops, and it's happening energetically. They're feeling you, you're feeling them. It's a mess. And it all gets very tangled up. But there's something very freeing in knowing that you don't know. It's interesting, actually, like one of the places you can even see this is in the Bible, right? The serpent in the Garden of Eden is the serpent that lives on the tree of knowledge. And that knowledge actually just creates a mess. Knowledge is a major burden. It's fine to play with it, where you can put it down or do whatever you need to do with it. But as soon as the structures of knowledge start owning you, as soon as you can't just disassemble a life and rebuild a new one and be okay with that, suddenly you find yourself entrapped in a world that doesn't really go anywhere. And we've all been there. And I think the teaching here is just that the road to having any control over that is a road of actually recognizing the limitations of our knowledge, recognizing the limitations of our instrument of perception. Because then the instrument can be used for exactly what it is. You have this imaginational machine that can be used to manifest and create all sorts of beautiful things. It can be used for communication. It can be used to model different patterns of cause and effect so that you can change from something that is not useful to something that is useful. But it's like until you see that, until you can make that distinction of the limitations of your perception, you don't even think to use it like that. So you don't really own the knowledge possesses you. I don't know, kind of a different teaching. But in my experience, there's a lot of truth to it. And whenever I start getting too confident in my perceptions, that's when I quickly start to get stuck in things. The idea is to have lines in the sand that you don't go below, right? When you start to feel yourself getting pulled down, you have to actually notice it and just stop everything you're doing. And so that's what a class like this gives you, right? It gives you that ability to stop everything, rise above the story, and just be in this moment, to step out of the world of knowledge and just be. But we also have to negotiate this world. And we're doing it with faulty equipment. We're doing it standing on one leg with an arm tied behind our back and one eye closed. And I think I don't know is a gateway to a lot of freedom, to being able to actually start working with life in ways that are useful. right, guys, I'm sorry I talked way too long. Why don't we take some time and just sit quietly for the rest of the session unless anyone has questions? Just breathe. Let your awareness take in the environment around you. Everything that was said tonight got in there. It will continue to percolate. And life will give you experiences that demonstrate its truth to you. What if you just let it all go? Nothing to understand. Nothing to master. Nothing to achieve. This week, I want you just to keep an eye open for the holes in your knowledge. Rather than hard focusing on the known, soft focus so that you can see the big picture with all of its holes. Notice where you're projecting onto the screen of life. And remind yourself that what you're seeing is not an absolute truth. Focus on that this week and notice what it waters in your experience of life. What starts to grow from living that way? Any questions about any of that before we end? All right, guys. Thank you for coming. I'll be here next Thursday. Have a great week.
Thanks, Liam.
Mm-hmm.